We've talked about Frank's stories on this podcast, as well as the stories by the 43 authors of the encyclopedia, and even the stories from that duo that shall not be named.
Sure, yeah.
But today, Leo, we are talking about another set of authors and their amazing tales in the Dune universe.
Oh.
And I'd wager they could give that unnamed duo a run for their money.
I think so. I think his servant is right up there with Dune House Atreides and the Butler and Jihad. Yeah. People are going to listen to this episode and then be like, wait, that was fucking mean.
Yeah, it's a bit mean. But sometimes the truth hurts.
Sometimes the truth sounds mean. But I'm not here to protect your feelings. I'm here to tell the truth. Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV, and today, fan fiction.
Hello.
My name is Leo.
My name's Abu.
And today on the show, we're reading some fan fiction.
Wow.
I know.
This is new territory for me, by the way.
Oh yeah? You're not a purveyor of fan fiction?
No, I've never dipped my toes into that well. Have you? Are you like a Tumblr girly who used to read fanfic?
I am a prolific author. I've written hundreds of stories about Krillin from Dragon Ball Z. Just all of his brother. Romantic endeavor. Hell yeah, brother! No, I've read a few. I've read a few for sure. I think I was interested when I found out that like Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey were linked by that, by it being fan fiction, and I think I went down the rabbit hole at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the Akatar books, which is basically just shitty Twilight fan fiction. So
the Avatar books, like the Kyoshi.
No, Akatar, A Court of Thorns and Roses, by Sarah J. Maas. It is frankly just like bad Beauty and the Beast / Twilight fan fiction that turned it into its own series. So that's my hot take right off the top.
Yeah, I'll say, for anybody reading The Fourth Wing, I hear it's very similar. Are you reading Fourth Wing?
It's on my list. No, it's on my list. I'm going to definitely get to it soon in the next few months.
Well, anyway, none of those are what we're talking about today.
None of those matter.
We talked about doing a fan fiction, like looking at fan fiction and talking about fan fiction pretty early on.
Yes.
Like in the first year or two.
Yeah.
But Matthew Safford sent us an email. This is 3 years ago. We responded. I promise we responded. But specifically asking about the fan fiction, quote unquote fan fiction, called Elixir by Alan Sullivan. Now, we want to talk about Elixir, but Elixir is 100,000 words long. It is a full novel, and I think it was written in like 1980. Like, this is a book.
Wow.
Akin to the encyclopedia. And I actually have a copy now. So we will talk about it.
Very cool.
In the future when we're not dealing with Dune Part 2. And we also got an email from Allison Castillo this week who shared her massive 91-page play about a sort of what if Chani had left Paul, which is super fascinating. We'll absolutely be visiting that in the future. Yeah. I also have a friend who has a pilot episode screenplay for Dune that was pitched to the owner of the Dune IP rights.
Whoa.
At like 2001. Very interesting. We'll talk about all of that.
Yeah.
But before we get into it, we should take care of our housekeeping quickly.
Yes. So today's episode is going to contain some light spoilers and references to Frank's first 3 books. So that's Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. Of course, we have complete book club series for not only the first 3 books, but also God Emperor of Dune, the first 4 books. So, frankly, dear listener, you have no excuse. Go listen to those episodes, get caught up, and then you're good to listen today.
They are good books, as it turns out. Now, as always, a huge shout out to our Kwisatz Haderach level patrons: Case Aiken, Jonathan Lambert, Daniel Dion, Roman Caballo, and C.R. Spruill. Gentlemen, if you were here in the room with me, I would touch you on the shirt where your abs are.
That's right.
It's a reference that'll make sense later. We could not do what we do without your support and without the support of all of our patrons. So, as always, a giant shout out, a thank you to all of our patrons. Of course, we'll plug it at the end, but it's a fantastic way for as little as $2 a month to make it possible for us to continue doing this show.
That's right. Thank you so much. Okay, let's talk about the game plan for today's episode.
Right.
So we each chose one fan fiction out there in the large world of Dune fan fiction to talk about on today's show. So we'll each be sharing a synopsis and summary of what that fan fiction entailed.
Uh-huh.
And of course, if you're interested in reading it in its entirety, we will link them in the show notes below for your enjoyment. And then, of course, we will give it the old Gamjabar deep lore analysis treatment. Yeah. We'll talk about the things we liked. We'll talk about what worked. But then, of course, we'll also critique it and talk about the things that we felt didn't work or could have been better.
Yeah.
Now, of course, this is something that's a bit more out there. We've never covered fan fiction or done an episode in this style before. So we are very interested to hear what you think once you've listened to this episode. So reach out to us on Discord or via email, gamjabarpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know if this is the kind of Dune coverage that you'd like us to occasionally sprinkle in to the feed. Because to be clear, like today's stories are fairly short and simple and straightforward because we're really only like dipping our toes into this wide and deep world of fan fiction.
Yeah.
But if this is something you, dear listener, enjoyed and would want more of, then perhaps next time we'll take a dive into the deep end of the pool of fan fiction and try something a bit more meaty.
A bit more meaty, huh?
Hello.
Hello. You chose a pretty meaty story today. I don't know what you're talking about.
I did, true. Lots of meat in the story I picked today. All right. So with the housekeeping out of the way, let's take a short break. But buckle up, folks. You're going to want to stick around for these fan fiction.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody. Oh, hope you're ready for the first fan fiction that we chose today. So I chose, using on fanfiction.net, the sort by favorites feature to claw from the depths the story Joseph Atreides by Morph Writing, by user Morph Writing. And this is an ongoing story. Joseph Atreides is an ongoing story, currently sitting at 4 chapters, which tells an alternative version of the beginning of Dune so far. It's only 4 chapters in, asking the question, what if Paul had a twin brother?
Okay.
So, to cover the synopsis, the story begins with the birth of Joseph Atreides, following right after Paul. So Jessica gives birth to Paul, right after Joseph comes out.
I love that we're sticking with the biblical name themes.
Yeah. And again, that's like one of the funniest critiques of Paul and Jessica is just like, what a boring ass name in this like fans. I was like, Joseph Atreides sounds fucking ridiculous, only because I'm used to Paul.
Right.
So that's a great point. Yeah. We're sticking with the biblical white ass names. Now, Joseph's birth is shocking and frankly terrifying for Jessica and Dr. Yui, both of whom are like, what the fuck? We had no idea this was going to happen. They had no idea Joseph Atreides was there. This feels initially like a stretch, and it still is. I'll talk about that later. But we will come to discover that Joseph is born immune to most Bene Gesserit abilities. He has the sort of Atreidian genetic quirk that makes him immune to Bene Gesserit abilities. Kind of an interesting version of like Siona from God Emperor of Dune, or Hasmir Fenring from the first book. Someone who's kind of like immune to Paul's prescience, right?
Right.
Now, this could explain partially how he remained undetectable to Jessica's like inner awareness, right? She knew she was pregnant weeks into being pregnant. You're telling me she doesn't know she has twins? Well, he's invisible to her abilities. So that maybe explains it. Now, Joseph is born, and as the boys grow up together, Joseph seems initially like just better than Paul in every single way. He's like smarter. He's more intuitive. He's immune to the voice. He's more composed. He's immune to truth saying.
Whoa.
And also the observation of minutia. Jessica has no clue what he's thinking ever. Yeah. And he's almost like in a lot of ways, he's almost like Alia. Like, he seems weirdly mature for like a 5-year-old, or a 4-year-old, whatever.
Right.
But he does fall short of Paul in his physical prowess. He's like clumsy. He's lacking, quote, even the most basic control over his own body, end quote. Now, his ability, that he's immune to these Bene Gesserit abilities, actually sets up some very high stakes, right?
Totally.
The Bene Gesserit sisterhood discovering Paul's birth is problematic for its own reasons. But if Jessica gave birth to a boy who is immune to all of Bene Gesserit abilities, if he proliferated those abilities by breeding and having kids and whatever, the sisterhood would almost certainly order her to kill him to prevent like more people from being out in the universe that they have no control over, right?
Yeah. It's giving Siona?
It's giving Siona. It's giving, and again, you think about how many, and then every enemy of the Bene Gesserit is also going to want him because, wow, he is the silver bullet for the Bene Gesserit sisterhood.
Totally. How do we get those genes? How do we get that power?
Yeah.
Make us immune.
There's a kind of horrific line where Jessica notes he would probably be captured and dissected, likely still alive, to like figure out this genetic secret.
Totally.
So very, very visceral writing there. Now, the first chapter basically contains this, how we know Paul was trained, and then contrasting him with Joseph. Jessica trains them both as Bene Gesserit, but Joseph lacks the bodily control to come fully into those techniques. And then Thufir trains them both as mentats, and naturally being smarter and way better than Paul intellectually, Joseph takes that like a fish to water.
Yeah.
And he's like a crazy mentat already at like 5 years old, 6 years old.
Totally.
The boys are really close. There was a kind of worry that Joseph being superior to Paul intellectually would be something in between them, but Paul being a better fighter and being more capable physically balances out. So like Paul helps Joseph with his body and Joseph helps Paul with his mind. And they kind of become this unstoppable twin force, giving very Ganima and Leto vibes from Children of Dune.
Right. Yeah.
They're making inside jokes, quote, almost as if they had built their own language, end quote. So very clearly the Atreidian twins of Paul right here, a generation earlier.
Yeah, definitely. Now, chapter 2 of this fanfiction kicks off basically where Dune, the book itself, begins.
Right.
The boys are woken up by Jessica to be tested by the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohan.
Gaius Helen!
Gaius Helen! Now, a lot of this dialogue in this fanfiction is directly lifted from Dune.
Literally.
But of course, there's added lines in there that include Joseph and sort of acknowledge that he's there and exists. Now, the Gamjabar test, this scene basically plays out in the same way that it does in the book, except for a few notable differences. Joseph, for example, catches Mohiam's attention when he hesitates before the voice works on him and she tells them to kneel in front of her, right?
Come here.
That's a very iconic sequence in the Villeneuve films. We see that fade to black. The voice overwhelms Paul and he can't help but do exactly what he's told. Joseph, that shit doesn't affect him at all.
Yeah.
And she notices. This perks up her ears. Now, the Gamjabar test itself, for Paul, plays out identical to the books. But for Joseph, it's quite bizarre. He does feel the pain at the start, and then is able to completely shut it off, and no longer feels any pain from the box. He's able to disconnect his physical body from what he's feeling in his mind.
Yeah.
Very similar to the way a certain character does with a certain thing called a pain probe in Heretics of Dune.
Yeah.
Kind of tap dancing around spoilers there.
Yeah.
So pretty cool.
But notably, a character who is also trained as a mentat. So this is like a mentat kind of awareness thing.
Yeah. It's like a super mentat ability.
Yeah. And very cool. We bring this up later, but this is something clearly this author has read all of the books and is bringing late book ideas in now. And it's very neat.
Yeah. Yeah. A true fan.
Indeed.
Now, another fun moment in this chapter is when Paul asks, they tried and failed in regard to men trying the spice agony to become Reverend Mothers. And Joseph has already sort of intuited the answer and cuts in before Mohiam says her classic line.
So good.
In this version, Joseph says it, "Oh no, they tried and died."
I love it. I love it so much.
So again, it's kind of speaking to this idea that he is very intelligent and is able to intuit things that are leaps and bounds ahead of Paul at this stage in his life. So chapter 2 then ends basically on that note, on the same exact note, they tried and died. But of course, Mohiam is much more suspicious here. She's kind of keeping an eye on Joseph and is wondering what this young boy's incredible mentat abilities could mean for the galaxy.
Right.
You know, like this is a huge thing to consider in the political context of what the Bene Gesserit are up to.
Yeah, she notably says, like, I have to remind myself to pay more attention to the goings-on of the mentats, because clearly this is going to shake stuff up.
Yeah.
But I'll also point out, she is not on to the fact that he is immune to Bene Gesserit abilities. She's just like, he's a little weird.
Yeah.
And he's clearly way more of a mentat than Paul is.
True. Good point. Her assumptions all throughout this chapter are like, oh, this is happening because he's a super mentat.
Right, yeah.
Not because he is immune to what I'm trying.
So as far as the like meta stakes, he's still undetected by the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood.
Yes.
Which I imagine will become important in chapters after chapter 4.
Yeah.
So chapter 3 covers basically the chapters with Thufir and then Gurney, you know, the don't sit with your back to the door thing, and then Gurney coming in and mood is for cattle and lovemaking, or whatever the line is. So leading up to the departure for Arrakis, and Joseph's presence subtly changes how the conversations ebb and flow. He actually warns Thufir to check the walls of Arrakeen. Quote, "Be prepared for traitors within our ranks. Check the walls. Track the water. Expect sabotage." End quote.
Okay.
Again, demonstrating his ability to think ahead and anticipate threats.
Right.
It's very fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the only other notable beat in this chapter, I think, is when Joseph admits to Paul, in between the mentors, I believe, to having impressions of the future. Like, Paul's like, why did you warn about the walls and, like, the traitors?
Right.
And Joseph's like, I have an impression. You know those dreams you're having? And Paul's like, oh my God, you're also having prescient dreams? And Joseph's like, no, it's kind of just a sense of half-forgotten memory of somewhere I've already been.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly Paul's abilities, but clearly adjacent in some way.
Yeah. I found that really interesting because we're given no indication that Joseph will have or does have Kwisatz Haderach level abilities of prescience to see the future.
Right.
But it does appear that he has unique enough Super Saiyan mentat abilities to intuit the future so well that it is nearly prescience. And maybe that'll come into play in the future, but I like that it's sort of an open question this early in the story.
Now, finally, chapter 4 wraps on Duke Leto joining the boys, and they have a final chat before their departure for Arrakis. And the conversation, through the conversation, the boys basically lay out, like, you know, it seems really likely that the Emperor, who also has massive stores of spice, will want you to fail in your spice production so that the cost of spice artificially goes up. Mm-hmm. So probably the Emperor will send Sardaukar in Harkonnen uniforms as part of like this sabotage, basically this galactic sabotage. And not only is Joseph's presence catalyzing these conversations and kind of pushing them toward really going a step further and going it's not just dangerous on Arrakis. These are the dangers, and this is how they're going to manifest, probably.
Yeah.
It also doesn't change the fact that Duke Leto has to go to Arrakis.
Right.
And he has to seek out the Fremen. And Joseph points out, like, what if the guild is in on it? And Duke Leto isn't really able to respond to that. So it's an interesting conversation. Otherwise, it basically plays out like it does in the original, and they kind of bring up their concerns and ask their questions, and, you know, that's basically where the chapter ends.
Yeah. It's an interesting wrinkle to have two super beings who can potentially predict the future and call out things like, oh, the Sardaukar are going to be hidden among the Harkonnen when they attack us. Because it is funny when you reread Dune, and especially when you reread the whole series by Frank again, you hilariously realize how much Frank is just telling you what will happen.
Yeah.
You're like, wait a second. Did you just spoil the end of the book on like chapter 2?
Yeah.
And so it is an interesting wrinkle to have not just one Kwisatz super being who can just spoil the book constantly, but two of them being like, this is basically what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But then also using that as a device to create this tension, right? Will it happen exactly as they've said, or will something change? Is this changeable? Is the future locked in? All of those like big questions that we love about Dune.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It also, I think it's the power of two minds are greater than one, right? Like two super minds are greater than one super mind, and them able to have like ideas that they bounce off of each other is pretty fun.
Yeah.
And that's what there is so far of Joseph Atreides. So we've covered the major beats of the story. Let's talk about what we liked, and then we can talk about like what we think could have been done better.
Yeah.
And I'll let you start, Abu. What did you like about this fan fiction?
Well, I have to say it's pretty well written.
Yeah.
I was quite impressed by the writing. And as we stated earlier, the author clearly has a deep understanding of the lore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like little details, like Leto's olive skin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are captured correctly in this story. There was at no point in these 4 chapters that I had to stop myself and go, well, that's not exactly how it works. Or, well, a later book totally changes this, so this is wrong.
Yeah.
And I was quite impressed by that. So the details were correct, the lore was correct, and the writing itself, I think, was pretty good, all things considered. Like, again, I don't have too much context for fan fiction and typically how well-written fan fiction is. But if this is the level of quality, I mean, I've read worse books.
Yeah. I've read
worse actual published books.
Worse books, yeah.
So pretty good stuff. I, of course, I want to acknowledge that a lot of the writing is literally Frank's writing, though, because it's lifted entirely from the book itself. But of course, the author writes in a lot of stuff about Joe themselves, and it fits nicely in. It doesn't feel out of place.
Right.
So definitely hats off to the author for being able to write that well. I certainly couldn't.
Yeah.
The other thing I did enjoy was basically just the premise, right? Like the whole premise of this fan fiction is that Paul is a twin brother who's unique and different in his own way and adds a interesting twist to the story. And I'm here for it. It's a fun thought exercise.
Totally.
And I think down the line, it does open up some fascinating possibilities for how this could play out if Paul did have a twin brother. Obviously, this fan fiction is still in progress, or the author got bored and gave up on it, because there's only 4 chapters, the 4 that we discussed. So we are kind of left wondering whether this brother will even survive into the story. Like, will he make it past the attack on Arrakeen? Will the brother also be accepted among the Fremen like Paul and Jessica were? That's all left up in the air. Don't know which direction the author was going to go. But based on the writing and based on what I am assuming is some foreshadowing placed in these 4 chapters, I got the sense that maybe Joseph was being set up for a tragic death that would serve as some sort of emotional catalyst for Paul to push him forward in some way. That feels a little basic to me, though. Again, who knows if that's the actual direction, but if that were to happen, that would feel kind of disappointing.
Yeah, agreed.
If I were to take the reins of this story, honestly, I would keep Joseph alive through the entire first book and bring him all the way into Dune Messiah.
Yeah.
And then use Joseph as someone who becomes incredibly disenchanted with Emperor Paul and begins to push back on this idea, like starts pushing back on Paul as a messiah, as the ultimate ruler. And we get to explore some of those ideas of charismatic leaders that Frank warned so much about through perhaps the voice of Joseph in the story. I think it would also be kind of fun for Joseph to become the mastermind behind the stone burner attack, like the pivotal moment in Messiah. And that, of course, would be quite the betrayal,
right.
Quite the personal betrayal for Paul to be attacked in this way by his brother. But as we know, he's the Kwisatz Haderach. He would know this betrayal is coming years down the line. He would have seen it in his visions a dozen times. So it could add this extra tension to Messiah where Paul has to choose which path of his future does he take. The love for his twin brother or the love for Chani and the personal sacrifices for humanity. Right. He has these options and he's got to juggle all of these balls. and figure out which path he's willing to commit to.
Mm.
So Joseph could add an extra wrinkle there. That's all me hypothesizing and kind of getting into what I think this fan fiction could do, but it has certainly got my mind turning, and I really appreciated that, like just the fact that this is a fun thought exercise.
Yeah.
That gets me imagining how Joseph could fit in the story, I think speaks to how fun the premise is.
Totally. Yeah, 100%. It's funny because like based on the fact that it's called Joseph Atreides, I don't think they would kill him off early. I mean, maybe that's like the end of the book, and then we kind of get an impression of what's going to happen after. But I was like, what if they kill Paul? What if Paul dies?
Holy shit.
And Joseph has to like step into what he knows he's like not equipped for. Obviously there's a lot of ways that could play out. Now I'll jump in with what I liked, and I'll say I agree. The tone of the writing is like spot on.
Yeah.
There were times when I couldn't even tell what was original and what was from Frank and what was from this writer, which is like, well, that's really good. Like that's pretty solid. And again, I also love the premise of like you make this narrative change and then you weave those changes into the original text and you kind of let it play out, and that is fun. It's a fun thought exercise. It's probably a fun writing exercise too. And I genuinely enjoyed reading it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I think regarding what you're saying about like where he could go in Messiah, I got very like Bean vibes from Ender's Game. Did you ever read the Ender's Game series? Like Ender's Game, Ender's Shadow?
I don't think I've read the whole series. I've certainly read the first one. I loved the first one.
So, and maybe this is like gentle spoilers for like Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow. They're great books. I recommend people read them. The author's a piece of shit, but the books are very good. Bean, who's like much smarter than Ender Wiggin, is physically not as capable, and he's not as much of a leader. He doesn't have as much charisma. So even though he is mentally better than Ender in every single way in the Ender's Game book, he is not suited for the role of leadership that Ender is. And that's why he understands intellectually Ender should be the one at the top of the class. Even if I'm smarter than him and can figure shit out faster than him, I should let him do that because that's his role.
Fun.
And Ender's Shadow follows the exact same timeline of Ender's Game, but you follow Bean the entire time. So
God, I love when stories do that.
So it's the best I've ever seen someone do it.
Wow.
Also because the twist at the end of Ender's Game, Bean figures it out like a third of the way through the book.
Incredible.
And then you find out reading that he kept it a secret for the whole first book because he fucking figured it out like really early. So I was thinking, what if Joseph is figuring out what's going to happen with Paul and then realizing, this has to happen for probably, like, what if he figures out the golden path?
Way early.
Really early. Yeah. And then has to then deal with like, how do I let my twin brother go through all this stuff, the stone burner, all of this shit? Like that could be a really fascinating perspective that could also shed some new light on the inevitability of what happens to Paul. Because we're so quick to say, should Paul have done this? Should he have made this choice? But I think a big theme in Dune is that he doesn't have a choice. He is a tragic figure. So maybe Joseph, as much as he changes a lot, maybe he cannot change those axiomatic moments. And that just becomes a new way to look at these familiar events.
Yeah. Oh, very cool way to think about it. And now maybe I should revisit the Ender's Game series because you've really sold me on it.
If not just Ender's Game and then Ender's Shadow is really great. In all honesty, there's additional books. I read some of them. They were good. They were really interesting. And I know that I should go back and read all. Anyway, but I also will say the thing that I mentioned earlier, I'll repeat now. This story brings late Dune ideas into the first moments of Dune in a way that I fucking love.
Yeah.
And feels very in line with like, if Frank could go back and revise Dune, having written Dune, Messiah and Children of Dune and God Emperor and Heretics and Chapter House, if he were to go back and say, let's make the whole series a little bit more consistent and more introduce some of these late ideas early on, it would feel like this. And I think that's just, that's an excellent gift that Morph writing has given us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun.
So that's what I liked about it. What about ways to improve? What are you thinking?
Couple of small critiques here. I think as far as the writing goes, as much as I complimented it, it's written well.
Yeah.
But personally, it wasn't to my tastes. There's a lot of what I'm going to dub as thesaurus writing all throughout this story.
Yeah.
A line that stood out to me, for example, was, quote, "Though they were still precluded from visiting the Landsraad, much to Joseph's consternation."
Yeah.
End quote.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, they were kids, they couldn't go to the Landsraad, and he was annoyed about that.
Right.
You know, there's a much simpler way to say that, but it seems like
kind of an attempt.
The author perhaps picked up a thesaurus and it attempted to make it more
poetic and
highbrow than it needed to be, or at least seemingly highbrow. And that sort of writing, for me personally, is just a bit of a turnoff because I have a background in media. That's what I was trained in, and I work in the video and audio world where the KISS method is kind of king. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. That's how you write your stories. That's how you deliver the story. You need to be as direct and clear as possible, using the simplest and least amount of words as possible.
Right.
And that's the type of thing that I respond well to, because that's the type of writing that I do myself, the type of storytelling that I do myself. So I'm always a little turned off by like overly flowery writing. That's why poetry almost never lands for me. It's just goes a little above my head. And especially like dense academic word choice in a book that like maybe doesn't need it also feels a little bit silly to me. Like I always prefer when something is direct, concise, short. Use simple words, use short words, and use as few words as possible. Like that's my mantra.
I touched him on his shirt where his abs are. Something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This next book, this next
I
fan
barfed
fiction.
in the fancy toilet.
That's right. Nails the KISS method. We'll get to it in a bit. I do want to say I recognize that there is place for like poetic, flowery writing, and obviously there is a place for academic writing. There are certain cases where that's necessary. So I'm not really like necessarily bashing those styles of writing. Sure. I'm just saying that it probably wasn't necessary in a story like this. There was a simpler way to deliver the narrative.
I also think, like, as we've read through Dune together, there are moments when Frank writes in this beautiful, poetic way, but it very seldom feels out of place. It's like Leto overlooking the beautiful sunset and this like incredible, and you read that and it feels right because it's earned and it meets the rhythm of the overall writing.
Totally.
So I think it felt to me, I agree, and this is actually the first thing that I also have as a critique, is that moments like the one that you highlighted felt like this fan fiction author saying, well, Frank uses big words, so I should use big words.
Yes.
When keeping it simple sometimes, not always, but keeping it simple sometimes would be both less distracting, because you should not use words that distract the reader from the story you're telling them.
Right.
And also, it would be true to Frank's style, because Frank has plenty of times where it's like, Duke Leto looked tired.
Yeah.
And it's not like he sagged with the weight of 1,000 nights of unslept fatigue. It's just he looked tired. And you read that and you're like, oh, fuck, I feel that. I feel tired. I get that. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Frank is direct sometimes, and he knows how to balance. That's what makes Frank a really good writer, is he knows when to be poetic, and then he knows when to... he doesn't know always. Beef swelling.
Right, beef swelling, certainly not poetic. I would call that quite direct.
Super direct, super distracting. It's just the worst of every world. Beef swelling. Adult beef swelling.
Yeah.
Man, that is a child.
I like that you pointed out, like, oh, Frank used big words, so I got to use big words. I think this is something that a lot of young or inexperienced writers and storytellers, it's like a trap you fall into. Certainly I'm guilty of it myself, where I sort of had to be trained out of the mindset of, oh, if I use like big words and complicated sentences, that makes my writing better. That's not true. There's a skilled way to do that and an unskilled way to do that. And I think that's where the nuance lies, is like, poetic writing, dense academic writing is not a bad way to write inherently, but doing it in an unskilled way and not knowing when to weave that in and out of the story, that's what separates a good writer from a great writer.
Totally.
The other critique that I had beyond the writing is, as much as I liked the premise itself, I found myself imagining what I would do with it more, because the story didn't give me much of what it chose to do with it. So my like main critique here is like, twin brother idea, very cool. In these 4 chapters, Joseph has not really done anything discernible or interesting to the story yet. And perhaps it's too early, as they say on Love Island, it's early doors. maybe we're just setting up things to come down the line, but these 4 chapters, as we stated earlier, basically directly lifted from Dune with additional writing in there to explain Joseph and to acknowledge his existence with extra lines of dialogue and stuff. And this does make me wonder, like, maybe this is just par for the course for fan fiction. Again, I'm super inexperienced with this world, so maybe this is what a lot of fan fiction is like. But I personally, if I'm coming into a fan creation like this, I would like it to really lean into its premise. Dear author, pop off with your fan fiction, like really spend the original story and start asking the big questions of what if, what if this happened? What if this happened? How do things dramatically change? So perhaps there's a bit of subtlety here that's lost on me, but I would have liked this premise to lean in a little harder from the get-go. I think so far in these 4 chapters, not much has changed. It is still basically the beginning of Dune.
Yeah, right.
What about you, though? What critiques did you have for this fan fiction?
Well, so I've already mentioned that, the writing is a little distracting at times. Like the original chunks of writing is a little distracting at times. At other times, again, undetectable from the original text, which is an achievement in and of itself. So I would say my only other critique is, I agree. This is like very early on. And I think like by chapter 8, if we have some really bold changes or honing in on the focus of things cannot change because of the nature of the golden path, right? Like that would be an interesting thing as well.
Yeah.
But you still need to kind of justify why we're rereading Dune.
Yeah.
With tiny changes, right?
Totally.
I would say my only other critique is like, I think this story is only for people who are familiar with Dune, who have read the book by Frank. And the most notable and enjoyable parts of it are basically enjoyable and notable because of how they interact with the original novel. And I think if you're just reading it blankly, the original is still better. So I don't think that it's like improving upon the text. It's only interesting as a supplementary experience. And because of that, I think that more work needed to be done at the top to properly address both a Bene Gesserit and an imperially trained Suk doctor missing a twin.
For real.
Because
for months.
9 months, probably. Like, Joseph's abilities partially explain why Jessica didn't notice with her internal awareness. Sure.
Right.
I kind of buy that. I guess it is documented that women will give birth to twins and not know that they had twins.
Certainly
that happens. Sure. So if you rule out her Bene Gesserit abilities, she's only aware of one child. Sure. Jessica's in the dark. Dr. Yui is a full-ass Suk doctor. Better than current modern real doctors.
Right.
And you're telling me he couldn't feel 2 little pairs of legs kicking in the womb?
Right.
I don't fucking buy it.
Joseph, immune to Bene Gesserit abilities, but is he also immune to, I don't know, medical equipment?
Yeah.
Is he not going to show up on an ultrasound?
Yeah. It's very strange. And I will say, even when I was fully bought in and very much enjoying reading, I was still like 15% distracted. Like, that hasn't really been addressed for me yet. Like, I still feel like that is a step too far in expecting me to suspend that disbelief.
Yeah.
Again, a new reader, someone who hasn't read Dune and doesn't know Bene Gesserit and doesn't know the Suk doctors, sure, they might be like, okay, I get it. Like, that's fine. But for someone who, by definition, is familiar with Dune, I think that more work needed to be done at the top. Just a sentence or two to say, like, this is why it worked out this way,
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, I will wrap up by saying I actually was delighted in how enjoyable it was. I will go on the record and say a lot of fan fiction is not this enjoyable that I've read. And I look forward to more chapters, although I checked and it looks like the first chapter was published in January of 2023 and the last chapter 4 was published in June of 2023. So we're coming up on maybe a year since this writer has written, but that's fine too. Not every great story needs to have an end, and already it's inspired some interesting conversations about would a hyper intelligent twin brother change things, or is everything already locked into place because of Paul's early prescient dreams.
Yeah,
and
it was fun.
I don't know. So we're going to take a quick break now,
Mm-hmm.
but don't go anywhere, because when we're back, we've got His Servant by Fairy Bitch Helen.
That's right.
That's their username.
That's all you need to know. Welcome back, folks. Let's get into the fan fiction that I picked.
Yeah.
Our second selection for today is, of course, a low-brow smut about Fade Rotha.
Yeah.
About Austin Butler.
Huh.
So this one is titled His Servant and is written by user Fairy Bitch Helen. That's the username.
Nice.
Which already should really set the tone for what we're about to dive into. The premise is very straightforward. We're basically following the point of view of one of those white-clad female Harkonnen servants that we see throughout the film. Baron kills a couple of them in part 2.
Yeah.
This fanfiction takes place in the middle of part 2, actually, around the point where Fade Rotha is about to take over the governorship of Arrakis.
Right.
He hasn't quite arrived yet. That's where the story picks up here. So, getting into the fanfiction, our main character is Nonali, a faithful, if bland servant of the Baron who is stationed on Arrakis, and her primary duties at the start of the story seem to be basically pouring the rejuvenating oil bath for the head of House Harkonnen.
The balsamic vinegar.
The balsamic vinegar bath. We also meet in the servant quarters her tight-knit group of friends, I guess. Amma, Beatrix, and Kor. Those are her fellow servant friends.
Glad they got names, because they were all very well developed throughout this story.
Yeah, that's about all we know about them, honestly. And pretty quickly, Nonali is given a brand new assignment. She will no longer be working for the Baron, and instead, she will be the personal servant of the sexy and terrifying new governor of Arrakis himself, Fade Rotha Harkonnen.
Huh. Wise men say... Oh, that's Elvis. Yeah, Fade Rotha. Yeah, Austin Butler. Sweet. So
from there, the romance blossoms at truly a breakneck pace.
It's unreal.
Unreal how quickly Fade kisses Nonali on an ornithopter ride over the desert, and then very shortly after invites her to his bed and the two of them bang.
Yeah.
I wanted to share an example of some of the spicy and riveting dialogue, in particular from that scene where they're about to go out on the ornithopter ride right before they kiss.
Can I play one of these characters?
You can, absolutely. You must play Fade, of course, because you do a great Fade.
Okay.
Quote, I trailed behind him. He was walking to the place, which is a typo, I think they meant palace. He was walking to the palace exit. He stopped abruptly.
I'm gonna take a look at the spice fields. Huh! You're joining, Baldy.
You're also bald.
But I'm hot and rich, so it doesn't count. Ha!
End quote. End scene. Truly incredible. I need Austin Butler to deliver this line.
That actually, though, it would be so fun for him to go like but I'm hot and rich, like, so it doesn't count. Like,
it doesn't count.
In that voice would actually be so fucking funny. It'd be so good.
Funny.
Yeah.
I was laughing out loud at this line.
Also, I'm like, this girl's gonna get herself killed.
Right.
This is still, he is the dangerous Baron.
Yes.
And she's like, you're also bald. Shut up, Nonali, you're gonna die.
Very bold of Nonali. Honestly, all the comments at this section were all people being like, does she have a death wish? What is happening? Why would she talk back to the Baron like this?
That makes sense in like chapter 11 when they're like hooking up and stuff, but like now, oh my god, you're gonna die.
The bald thing kind of becomes like a cute pet name thing they do with each other too, so like I guess we're just establishing it early here.
Yeah.
Regardless, of course, they sleep together, they bang multiple times throughout these chapters, and then eventually there's a meeting with Moheim where they're just like fully holding hands.
Yeah, it's subtle. You can tell they're together if you know what to look for, and Moheim knows what to look for. If two people
a master of minutia,
are holding
Moheim.
hands, fingers interlocked, squeezing.
What could it mean?
I don't know. But Moheim
long looks at each other and whispering at each other.
Yeah.
And basically, Moheim becomes suspicious of who the hell Nonnally is and why the Na Baron is interested in her and sleeping with her. Right. And through the course of the story, it's revealed that Nonnally is actually not just a mere servant of House Harkonnen. She has Bene Gesserit heritage.
Bum, bum, bum.
Apparently, she's the progeny of one of Moheim's rebellious students named Amiza Fallow. Incredible name.
That's a very cool name. I like that.
And Amiza ran away with a disgraced Harkonnen lover, I guess. And they had Nonnally together. And somehow this makes Nonnally a high-ranking Bene Gesserit just by birthright because her mom was one.
That's
not how the Bene Gesserit work at all, of course. But this book is like seemingly really leaning into the fact that she inherited Bene Gesserit powers.
Yeah, like they're inheritable. Which is not how it works. Your mother knowing how to do yoga does not make you a yoga person when you are
exactly.
born. I'll also point out here, we'll talk about this again later, there are user comments because this is on Wattpad, and it shifts to Gaius Helen's perspective. And user, who was this? Whozy752, my favorite user.
Yeah, Whozy was all over this story.
Commented, quote, "Not her ugly ass again," end quote. Which is fucking spectacular. The like super bought in but super petty reader who's like, ew, fuck this character. Because I think we've all been there. Like, we've all been in a multi-character story and it jumps to someone's perspective and we're like, oh, fuck this person. So funny because I was like, oh, what's the insightful comment that someone's left at this moment in this story? He's like, not this fucking ugly ass.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, honestly, every time Game of Thrones switched to a Theon Greyjoy chapter, and I was like, God fucking damn it.
Say it again for the people in the back.
I have to read about this motherfucker again. I don't care.
Oh, the drowned kid. Fuck off. Boring.
Yeah, get your drowned god out of here. Get me back to a Sam chapter.
Get me back to Arya.
Get me back on the wall. Get me back to Arya. Yeah, totally.
I don't hear about the wolves.
Indeed. Okay, back to the fanfiction. Continuing with our incredible story here. Moheim calls in Nonnally to the room, and Nonnally undergoes the Gom Jabbar test in basically the same exact way that Paul does. And, of course, it's excruciating. She can barely survive the pain. But what helps her, Leo?
Oh.
What helps her is imagining Fade Rotha telling her, keep going.
Keep going. Huh. 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 Keep going.
Incredible. Love is love. I love love. Now, a distraught Nonnally, post-Gom Jabbar test, runs to Fade's room and immediately pukes into the toilet. The least subtle way to tell us she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And then they bang, like, almost immediately. She, like, pukes, probably still has puke dribbling down her chin, and then they fuck.
It's the best time to fuck. When you got that aftertaste in your mouth and your teeth feel brittle.
That's right. That acid, that bile in your mouth.
Yeah, the bile's in your mouth.
Lovely.
You're like, oh, let's get it on. Anybody. Right now. Here and now.
Meanwhile, while the two are fucking, Lady Margot and Moheim are literally talking about the Gom Jabbar test.
Sipping tea. Very important.
Sipping tea. Like, every line of this scene reminds us that they're sipping tea.
It's like, I'm going to say a single sentence and then sip some tea, and then you say a single sentence, and then it's your turn to sip tea, and it's...
Right. If there was like, if we sound designed this scene into a radio drama, there'd be so much just slurping ASMR constantly. They're both sipping tea. And the entire purpose of that...
They're so thirsty.
No. The entire purpose is so when Moheim tells Lady Margot that Nonnally passed the Gom Jabbar test with flying colors, Lady Margot can literally do a spit take with her tea.
I also missed, at first I was like, she says, oh, she passed the Gom Jabbar test. And then it's like Margot sipped her tea. And I was like, wow, Abu fucked up. She didn't do a spit take. But then 4 sentences later, Moheim's like, yeah, and the test that I said she passed, I really tried. And that's what causes the spit take. And I'm like, very seldom do you spit take on elaboration. It's like, you typically spit take at the very idea of something. You're like,
at the mic drop moment.
You're like, what the fuck? She passed. But it's not, it's like, she passed. Okay, sip. Okay. And then it was actually quite a difficult test. What fucking what? What the fuck are you talking about? That's crazy. It's like, no, it's always hard. Margot, what's happening?
That's not the shocking part. Margot, the Comte test is difficult.
It's like a weirdly timed.
So funny. Also, just the visual of Leia Sadu. You know,
what?
High-ranking Bene Gesserit, cool, collected, calm, can say "do" the fuck out of you.
Muscular control.
Literally spit taking.
Fucking say it again. What?
Oh God, I was like just losing my shit at this scene. It was so funny. Okay, moving on. There's a little bit more to cover here, and then we're done. The story continues. The next day, Nonnally goes to the library.
The Harkonnen library.
Yeah, didn't picture the Harkonnens as well read, but sure. She goes to the Harkonnen library and checks out some casual books on Bene Gesserit secrets.
Containing all of the secrets of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood. You know, that everyone has.
She's flipping through these books.
What is the voice? Explains the voice. She's like, oh, good.
Right. Check Appendix A.
Best kept secret of the Bene Gesserit.
She flips through these books, and as you're alluding, she reads up about the voice and then tries it. And recall, she has inherited her Bene Gesserit abilities because her mom was Bene Gesserit, and is immediately successful on her second try at using the voice.
That's how it works. And it works alone. You don't have to have another person. You can just use the voice alone.
Right. Just in a quiet library alone. You know? The librarian is over here like... And then immediately after, none of these moments are like interconnected in any way. We just immediately... She then goes to the Harkonnen doctor next because she's feeling pukey again, I guess. Yeah. And the doctor's like, okay, pee in this cup for me. And then he's like, you're pregnant. Yeah. Do you know who the father is? And it's like, yeah, man, we know who the father is. You've only been fucking him every chapter.
You know, I learned recently, though, the Egyptians had a pregnancy test where you would pee on, like, barley.
Whoa.
And if it sprouted faster than unpeed on barley, you were pregnant because women who are pregnant have a hormone in their body that's like a growth hormone. And it will cause barley to sprout faster.
Whoa.
So the Egyptians, thousands of years ago, were like, we fucking figured it out. And I'm like, how the fuck did you get to that? Like, who was like, pee on a bunch of stuff. We're just going to figure this out. Like, I'm blown away. The Egyptians are so fucking cool. But I was thinking, like, are they really going to have the same test 20,000 years from now for pregnancy? And I was like, well, it's been working for 3,000 years. So, maybe, yeah.
Why change it?
If it ain't broke.
Especially because, the medical system not exactly known for studying women all that much.
Fucking true.
Once we figure like one thing probably works, just stick to it for the next 1,000 years. So in the story, not only runs to Fade, of course, immediately, tells him. Fade cries. I can't imagine Fade Rotha crying, but he cries tears of joy. He's overwhelmed with emotion, but he's also afraid. He tells her that the Baron is wrathful and that Moheim is scheming, and the only way for them to keep the baby and for Nonnally to live is for her to join the Fremen, the very people he's on Arrakis to wipe out with bombs.
Also, Nonnally, a famously white-skinned, bald Harkonnen servant, is going to seamlessly slip into the ranks of the Fremen undetected. And we got early on that she was like, she practiced the sand walk because she's on Arrakis. Right. She was training with a knife in case she needed, read a book about like Shai Hulud means word. She taught herself some Fremen words in case she needed them. And it's like, Paul kind of did the same, but Paul's prescient.
Right. He's also the Duke of this planet. He just needs to know about it.
Yeah. All right. Sure. It's kind of an interesting... It's sad. It's a sad ending, because they're like not going to see each other again. And she doesn't know, of course, that he's destined to get killed by Paul. It's like, oh, that's sad.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it ends. She goes out. They part ways. She's going to name the child Fade Rotha if it's a boy. He asks her to name it Luna if it's a girl, I guess. Luna Lovegood.
Yeah, he's very Ravenclaw, yeah.
And that's where the fan fiction ends. It seems like there's still more to come because it's 12 chapters, but we maybe haven't reached a conclusion. But also, we could potentially read into this as this is their tragic parting of ways, and then they never see each other again because Fade gets murked by Paul. suit.
I feel like it's going to be a daughter, and I feel like it's going to be named Luna, and I feel like that's going to like lead into, because this story is recent, right? Like, isn't this from a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, March 11th, I believe, was where this final chapter was written. So it's ongoing, folks.
Yeah, we're going to learn all about probably Luna. Oh, and also she got the Harkonnen name. Did you catch that? Fade Routha was like, listen, not only Harkonnen, I'll love you forever and ever.
Amazing.
Even if we're parting ways. So I'm like, they're married? Like,
right.
This is Fade Routha's wife?
They signed the domestic partnership paperwork off page.
It was somehow in the library somewhere.
In the library, of course.
Wow.
Amazing
stuff. So
what'd
you think?
Frankly, I know we've said a lot of words, but at the same time, I'm at a loss for words. Yeah. I mean, just to be like a little brutal about it, pretty awful in basically every way, makes like little to no sense. But I will admit, I truly laughed out loud reading it at many points throughout the story. And so it certainly brought me joy in that sense. And honestly, I'm a little hesitant to even spend time railing against it and picking it apart too much, because honestly, I have respect for someone even trying this, I 100%. Guess. Just like kind of zooming out and getting meta about the idea of fan fiction. I've certainly never tried to write something like this and been confident enough to feel like I can put it out there. Yeah, like put it out on the internet for people like Whoozy to just comment on constantly. Yeah. So I just kind of respect that. And I like to think that Helen, the user who wrote this, maybe this is just their hobby.
Totally, yeah.
And maybe they just like write this in their free time for fun. They're not looking for this to be like published. They just write it and put it out there because it's fun.
Yeah, and I'll say there are comments of people being like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And oh shit, here we go. And like, there are people enjoying this, seemingly all in. So I'm like, maybe they're just a young writer. Maybe they just haven't been exposed to like, I took some advanced writing classes in high school, and it's like that. Those really helped. And I think without those, maybe I'd also fall prey to some of the sentences in these sorts of in this story. But like, hell definitely.
And all the typos,
quite a few typos, but
quite a few. Yeah. I respected that at the end of the day. Yeah, totally. Like I think something that I feel like I've kind of lost in my life is the idea of a hobby. I am kind of the person who's obsessed with like
jobs that you like.
Exactly.
That you get paid for. That's.
I think there's a certain joy in just doing something for yourself and for fun, and not being concerned with optimizing it or quote unquote winning or hustling for some next paycheck from it. And so, I don't know, hats off to Helen for just writing this thing for fun and putting it out there, and maybe a couple thousand people read it and comment on it. And that's it. Yeah. That's as far as this will ever go. And Helen gets a bunch of joy out of it.
And the number one Dune
podcast
kind
of envious, honestly.
Stumbles upon your fan fiction and kind of roasts you gently. And with love. We genuinely...
With love. Honestly, I'm envious. Yeah. I'm truly envious of that feeling of being able to just like have a hobby and not care how badly you do it. And just
you got to start somewhere.
Maybe not even put it out there. I wish I did that more often in my life, because I feel the lack of that. And honestly, some days, a bit of a hard truth here, Leo.
Yeah.
Some days I look back and I'm like, shouldn't have turned my podcasting hobby into a job. Like, my goodness, I still love it, and I'm super grateful for the position that we're in and the work that I get to do. I still get lots of joy out of it, but man. There's that rare day every now and then where I just fucking regret all of it. And I'm like, shouldn't have done this. And I wish I could just make bad things and not care about optimizing and winning and getting people to listen and paying bills on time. Everything that comes with turning your hobby into a job.
There's that meme where it's like, do what you love and you'll never work a day of your life. And it's like, instead it's do what you love, and now you do what you have to do for work all the time, and you fucked up and you made your hobby into a career. What the fuck is wrong with you? And it was like,
exactly.
That feels very real.
That definitely happens. And again, that's not to say that feeling is pervasive.
Sure.
That's a rare thing that happens on like tough days, on bad days, on stressful days. But I honestly wouldn't want to do anything else. I get a lot of joy out of this. Same. And I love the creativity.
Also, I've spent so much money on Dune shit, I can't walk away.
In too deep now, there's no backing out. I also wanted to add very quickly that, we've been talking about the comments a lot.
Yeah.
This fanfic was on Wattpad, is the service, I guess. I've never heard of this, but there's a feature where readers can leave comments on like a line-by-line basis. You don't just like leave comments at the bottom of a chapter or something.
Excellent
you can literally
feature.
like highlight a line and comment specifically on that line, which is an amazing feature.
Yeah. Once upon a time. Oh shit, here we go.
That's right.
Classic.
Exactly. Like comments like that were all over this. And I was cackling.
Yeah, same.
Like truly some of the comments were so unhinged that I couldn't tell if this was like parody or people's genuine reactions. There were so many comments about Feyd-Rautha's dick. Like I was giggling the whole time. And frankly, it added to my enjoyment. Like I was like, okay, this is like sort of like a poorly written story. But then I was reading all the comments and I was like, damn, this is a 12 out of 10 experience.
It's so good. The comments are so fucking funny. There was a line where they were talking about before they see Feyd-Rautha, they're like, oh, Feyd is the like mean, ugly, like awful, and someone just commented me. And I was like, oh, it wasn't someone, it was fucking Floozy or whatever. It was Hoozy.
I have to imagine Hoozy is like Helen's BFF, who's like supporting Helen's writing, you know, by like reading everything and leaving all these comments. So funny.
So good. It's so funny.
I'll wrap up my thoughts with a final quote that I wanted to share from this fan fiction, from this writing. This is about the Baron. Quote, "He halted the Reverend Mother's visits. She always brought drama and havoc when she came." End quote.
Hell yeah.
And frankly, hell yeah. We should all aspire to bring a little bit of drama and havoc wherever we
family
go.
reunions. It's drama and havoc.
So how about that abortion, huh, Uncle Joe?
Everyone's like, oh shit, this is just starting. No one's had any alcohol yet. That's wild.
Well, those are my thoughts. What about you, Leo? Did you have any enlightened thoughts about this fanfiction?
I will say I love it. I love this fucking story so goddamn much. It's so smutty. It doesn't have like explicit sex scenes, which I was a little bit shocked by. I was like,
right.
I really kind of expected the like full in erotic.
Yeah.
There's shit being printed in full bound books on the bookshelves with more explicit sex scenes than this.
Right.
And at moments, yes, it was so rough to read. I had a hard time even understanding what was happening. But I had some like proper belly laughs, and that is worth so much. Like it is so fun to just have a good time.
Yeah.
You know, there's that sort of so bad it's good kind of idea.
Yes. 100%.
I will reiterate, like I used to write a lot. Like I used to write a lot of like stories, and I liked writing. I actually really liked writing short stories. And I fucking promise you, I wrote stories worse than this when I was young, especially when I was in my cringy early teens of like, everything was so painful and awful, but he pushed forward. I was like writing the like weird shonen power fantasies I had, just so unnecessarily gritty and cringy and stuff. And I have all of those in like paper binders because I'm a child of the 90s.
Aww.
You know, it's like, this is someone writing stories and putting them on the internet is so brave. And I think I will say writing as a hobby and writing stories, it's something that takes time. You need space to practice. You just need to do it a lot. You need feedback. You need to be able to take that feedback and assimilate it and grow with it and not to take it too personally. And I think that this writer, Fairy Bitch Helen, is doing great. I'm loving it. Again, I think I would be a little disappointed if I found out Fairy Bitch Helen was in their 40s. I'd be like, oh, come on. Be a little bit better.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Listen, the grammar and spelling, they need some work.
Very rough.
The narrative content could then also be adjusted. Feyd-Rautha didn't feel like Feyd-Rautha. He just felt like the kind of, I don't know, dreamy-eyed fantasy boy the whole time.
Right.
It's like you look at Austin Butler and you go, what would he be in an ideal situation?
Right.
It's not at all Feyd-Rautha. So
it doesn't count because I'm hot and rich.
What a great line. I had a blast. I had a super fun time. So I will on my closing thoughts, I'll share two of my favorite sentences, which I've mentioned already, but I think they're just worthy of revisiting. First, quote, I barfed in the fancy toilet.
There we go.
End quote.
Harkonnen toilets, fancy. Confirmed.
The fancy toilet. And you didn't barf into it. You barfed in it. So I presume she got fully within it and then barfed. Who wouldn't if you're inside the toilet? And then my absolute favorite, I read this sentence and then just laughed and then read it again and laughed again.
Yeah.
Quote, I touched his shirt where his abs are. End quote.
Amazing.
I love it so much. Oh, it's so good. I touched his shirt where his abs are.
Right.
Oh.
Honestly, Helen, I need you to go in deeper. I need the next chapter to be like, I touched his pants where his cock is. You know? Like,
or just, I held his hand where his finger bones are. Like, just continue to tell me what things are where things are. It's so good. It's like, why didn't I think of this style of writing? I brushed my hair where the top of my head is. It's like
so good.
Fantastic.
So good.
Oh.
Yeah. And again, these are very short stories. We'll have them linked in the show notes below. Do yourself a favor. Set aside like an hour in the afternoon. Honestly, it takes like 30 minutes to blast through these. They're very short.
Totally. And I will say for the His Servant, you have to read it in incognito mode. I tried opening it in a normal browser and it was like, you have to sign in to read this. I don't know if that happened to you. Safari would not let me read the story unless I was in incognito mode, which also felt appropriate because it felt like the proper type of browsing for this type of story.
Right. You're kind of like reading softcore porn, so incognito.
Where his abs are.
Where his abs are. Love it. Thank you for that pro tip for anyone who's happens to be reading softcore porn out there.
Incognito mode.
Incognito mode, your friend. All right. Well, that wraps it up. That's our fun little weird episode about Dune fan fiction. These are the two that we selected sort of at random, honestly, but of course we'd love your recommendations as well. And if you've written any, my God, send them our way. We'd be interested in checking them out. Of course, things have been absolutely hectic for us right now with all the movie coverage and the exciting episodes we've been working on, the Lego collaboration, all of that. So we wanted to do something a little lighter and easier today.
Totally.
But again, if you're interested in more of this, we could give it a deeper dive in the future.
Indeed. Now, on the way out, we want to remind you of some ways to keep in touch with us and support what we do here at Gom Jabbar. And of course, the two best ways, as always, is to become a patron over at patreon.com/GomJabbar and to get some Dune-themed merch at gomjabarshop.com. Those links are in the show notes. Again, for as little as $2 a month, you can make a huge difference in giving us some stable income. Every episode takes like 20 hours of work, and we do not get paid for this because it's just us.
That's right.
We don't have any kind of parent company. Right. So please consider supporting us if you're in a financial place to do so. And if you're not currently in a place to be able to support us in that way, just telling your friends who just saw Dune Part 2 about this great podcast that talks about all things Dune. I have so many friends who have admitted to me that they are now going down rabbit holes of Dune lore because fucking spoiler alert, Dune's goddamn awesome.
Yeah.
Point them in our direction because word of mouth is the most organic way to grow an audience, and especially between this movie and Dune Messiah, whenever we get that, 5 years from now or whatever, we are hoping to maintain some of our listenership. And so spreading the word about us does a world of good. We really appreciate that as well.
It does. It does. Also, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Email us, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com. If you're a patron and you're in the Discord, hit us up. We love chatting with folks there in that community. So send us your thoughts, questions, Dune lore questions. Send us your fan fiction. Send us articles and videos to recommend that we check out. Send us cute pictures of your pets. Honestly, we love it all. We get so many messages these days. We're super behind. The inbox stresses me out every time I open it. But I also open it every single day and at least look at the messages, even if I don't have time to respond to them.
Same.
gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. So please reach out, say hello, and send us your thoughts. Especially if those thoughts are about where abs are located.
Tell me. She touched his shirt where his abs are. Is that his shoulder? I'm bad at anatomy. I don't know. His back. She touched him on his...
Right. I'm an artist. I didn't study biology.
She touched him on his sleeve where his abs are. Oh!
That's right.
What?
Oh. And he's got so many abs, that's a wide
That's true.
surface area for her to touch,
She could have been anywhere.
Which ab?
Lower abs, that's saucy. Upper abs, you could do that to a friend.
Right.
That's just fine. Yeah.
Right. Totally. That's more of just like a supporting gesture.
Yeah.
Lower ab
Oh, yeah.
could definitely trickle down further.
Yes, it could. To where his lowest abs are. We saw him shirtless. He's got a lot of abs.
Oh, yeah.
Enough for family. Family of abs. I don't know what that means.
Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic. So help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. And we're also on TikTok at Gamjabar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.